Hi, I'm Tom Reeve. I'm Deputy Editor of scmagazineuk.com, and we're here with Mark McClain, CEO of SailPoint, talking about identity and access management. Thanks for joining us today, Mark.
Good to be here, Tom. Thank you.
The insider threat. Organizations are increasingly falling prey to trusted staff, temporary staff, and vendors. What are organizations doing wrong?
It's a great question. In many cases, this idea of the insider threat is a fairly new concern. For a number of years, people have been worried about their perimeter defenses, we sometimes call them, right, keeping the bad guys out. And more we've seen instances where someone who was on the inside did something sometimes inappropriately bad. They made a mistake that led to a bad thing, but more and more the concern is intentional bad behavior by a bad actor. Mm-hmm. And so organizations, leadership, security officers, CISOs are more and more concerned about this concept of the insider threat. When does a person who appears to have valid access capable of doing something wrong? And so more and more people are looking at tools that help them understand, do people have the access they need to do their jobs, and only the access to need to do their job? So who has access to what, and is it appropriate? And then the second more difficult question is, and are they using that access in appropriate manners? Or are they doing something that's anomalous or a bad behavior?
Right. I mean, why aren't those tools already part of the standard network management toolkit?
Well, to some degree, access management has been around a long time. As long as there have been IT systems, we've been granting privileges to people to do something with a technical computer system, right? If I'm going to perform some transaction inside the organization, I'm going to access that system and have privileges that allow me to do something. So we've been doing that forever. The mindset that I think we inherited that goes really all the way back to the mainframe was this concept of the glass house, right? Where once you were safely inside the perimeter, things were fine. And what that led to was kind of the bad behavior over time of if you think of an access as a key, right? A key ring. We gave people lots and lots of keys over the course of their time with us, but we just didn't bother collecting the keys back because there wasn't a lot of concern about that. And as we've learned now with systems that are no longer safely held inside the glass house or inside the walls, now some of those systems are hosted by a partner of mine. They may run in a private cloud. They may be a SaaS application out in the cloud. So no longer does the security organization feel like it has a good handle on the keys. I'm not talking about PKI here, just the metaphor, right?
And so what does SailPoint do then? I mean, what do you do there?
What we do is help people get their arms around each identity. Typically that starts with employees, but it includes contractors and partners, anyone who has privileges to those systems. And we help get that single view of you and all of your privileges. The challenge for the organization is you are represented by different accounts and access privileges in all these different systems, and generally you and only you know all those things. So by the time you've been with an organization 20 years, you may have tens, if not even 100 accounts. And you're probably the only one that remembers all those accounts, if even you remember them, right? And so what our tool does is go out and gather all that information and bring it together in what we call an identity cube, kind of borrowing a metaphor from BI tools, right? Here's Tom, and here's all the things Tom has access to, all the systems, all the privileges, the different accounts which represent Tom and all those systems. So at least we start with visibility. Right. We can't begin to control something unless we understand all the pieces therein.
Right. Oh, I understand. So you're working with Societe Generale,
yes.
The bank, where of course a rogue member of staff, a trader, I believe, was able to accumulate credentials from various roles, as you're just describing here, and abuse the system. What can organizations like Societe Generale do, to secure those systems without just completely shutting everything down?
Yeah, we always talk about that there's so much power today for convenience, right? We want the business to be flexible and agile, so we have to let people get access to systems quickly and do their jobs well, right? The SocGen case was a classic example of the gentleman who at one time had been in sort of the IT function, as a result had a set of privileges that were appropriate for his role, moved to the trading function, and back to the key ring problem. No one ever took away those keys. So now he moves to the trading desk, starts to do some things that are probably not okay, and figures out that because he still has those privileges, he can effectively cover his tracks. He can erase log files, he can get access to accounts and privileges that are not really his to use, all because he was still basically performing like an IT professional when he was now a trader.
Right.
And our system would have captured that immediately. It would have said, when this man moved from this function to that function, his manager would have been flagged, and we would have said, hey, those privileges, are those still accurate? Are those still appropriate as he's moved to this new job? And the answer would have been no. We would have taken those away almost immediately. But because no one ever took away the keys to the old systems, he was able to do things that he shouldn't have been able to do, cover his tracks. So it's a classic case of inappropriate privilege management or account management allowed him to do things he shouldn't have been allowed to do.
Does this help in terms of the sort of financial compliance issues as well, where you've got different types of different functions within banks that have to have sort of firewalls or between them? Does this help maintain that kind of separation as well?
It does. Yeah, you started to go to the term we sometimes use in our industry, separation of duties, right? Where we know that it's inappropriate for someone who can perform function A to also perform function B, because at least the appearance of a bad behavior can happen, if not actual bad behavior. The classic case is to set up a new vendor in the system and then the ability to pay that vendor. Well, I could set up my Uncle John as a vendor and then start writing checks to Uncle John, who would write me checks back, right? Classic fraud case. Yeah. And so, separation of duties is a core aspect of a good IAM discipline, because I want to understand what are the barriers and boundaries that need to be between systems and or applications, and our tool allows, again, the visibility and then the control to expose that to senior management or the security team to make sure we're keeping those things in place.
Now, of course, a big issue that organizations and individuals everywhere are facing right now is this onslaught of phishing attacks. We've got phishing, we've got the sort of general phishing attacks, we've got the spear phishing attacks, we've got whaling and all kinds, any other.
Lots of metaphors.
Yeah, exactly, all sorts of metaphors and terminology, colorful terminology that we use. But as we're seeing an explosion in these attacks, is there something that IAM can do to help mitigate the impact of these?
I think you hit the right word, Tom. It's the impact. There's nothing in an IAM tool that prevents a phishing attack from coming through. We have this issue at our small company, right? Here, I, as the CEO, get emails that are sent to some of my colleagues that appear to be from me, asking for a wire transfer to take place. You know, we've now been alerted, so everybody's watching for these things. But those themselves, those emails often have nothing negative. They're asking the user to take an action, to do something, which I think was kind of the case at Target in the US, right? Where a phishing attack asked for a contractor to create a system account that he shouldn't have created, right? So our system wouldn't have prevented that email from coming through, but as soon as that account was created, we would have gone to it and said, hey, where did that account come from? Did it go through the appropriate approvals? Because part of our system is not just the ability to make changes on all those disparate systems, it's to have the workflow and the approvals to track that behavior. So if all of a sudden a new account for Tom shows up on a server, we're gonna ask, did Tom's manager or did the owner of that server approve that? And if not, we're gonna flag it. Doesn't mean we're necessarily gonna shut it off, but we're going to at least flag it and say, someone needs to review this because this doesn't look like it came through the appropriate channels. So we would have caught the Target breach. We would have caught the SOCGen breach with our systems in place. And the phishing, as you said. Of those requests to do something inappropriate, we wouldn't stop the request. We would catch the action as soon as it was done. Thus mitigating the impact of that. Fantastic.
So you've got a market report coming out next week. I think it's on Monday. And I was wondering if you could just take us through some of the highlights of the top level findings that you got.
Well, I mean, in general, what we're finding is, quote unquote, it's getting worse.
Okay, no surprise there.
Right, year over
we
year.
always hear that.
Exactly, imagine that, shocking. No, what we're finding is there are more and more people who admit that in their organizations they still have access to systems after they've left the organization. There are more and more people, and this is where the criminal element makes us also nervous, people who admit they are willing to sell their credentials for a fee. Right, the organized crime element now is coming in soliciting that kind of behavior, and more people are saying, oh, for a price, sure, I'll sell my credentials. So we're just seeing a lot more evidence of what's honestly ironic to us in some of these new findings, and we'll release a lot more of this next week, is inside, these are IT professionals in many cases. They say, hey, our organization needs to do a far better job of this. We don't have appropriate controls. But when asked what they personally might do, they themselves would actually perform some unethical behavior for a price. I'm like, that doesn't seem very appropriate. But that's sort of the reality we're living with. Everybody has a price.
Yeah,
exactly. Right. Yeah, so our teams, our organization should do a better job, but I would actually consider this myself. Really, that doesn't seem good.
And what about the adoption of IAM? How's that?
You know, in general, what we found is there was a first generation of IAM that's now probably 15 years old called provisioning, which was really the automation of the requests, really, right? What became challenging in organizations as long as 15 or 20 years ago was just the volume of requests. How many people are joining and moving and leaving the organization, and we have to make changes in the system. So there was an initial drive was kind of efficiency, automation, and that's fairly prevalent today. A less common capability was the compliance and certification, which swept in after regulations started to say, hey, let's at least verify that the right people have access to the right stuff. And even more cutting edge, relatively small part of the market today is actually using risk analysis to determine where do I have exposures, separation of duty, the ability for someone like the SOC guy to have capabilities that should no longer be present in his new role. So those kind of things are much more lightly deployed in large organizations today. There's usually some level of automation, but the ability to understand true risk and therefore kind of manage security exposures is not that common today. So we have a lot of opportunity as a company to still deliver our solutions very broadly in the market.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Mark. That's all the time we have today. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.